Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. Hello and welcome to another edition of Musical Talk. I'm Thos and I've been wondering if the famously brilliant but alcoholic songwriter Johnny Mercer wrote his best songs after visiting 32 bars. And if you don't understand that joke, and not everyone will, it's a technical joke about the structure of some of the classic 20th century songs from the Great American Songbook. You may know the form better as AABA, but it's technically known as the 32-bar song. There we are, nothing better than a joke that you have to explain. So let's quickly move away from that, but stay with the early 20th century, or at least let's resonate with it, because the show we're going to be talking about today is George and Ira Gershwin's Crazy for You. But, I hear you shouting, meaning you're either counting American bottoms or you have a question. Surely, you say, and I think you'd be right in saying this, and I'm guessing for you on your behalf, Crazy for You is not an early 20th century musical. It has songs by the Gershwins in it, so by its very definition, some of the elements of the musical come from the early part of the 20th century, but the show Crazy for You does not. It comes from the very end of that century, 1992 to be precise. Well, yes and no, because Crazy for You is a modern reworking of Girl Crazy, a great Gershwin musical from 1930. And if the name Girl Crazy means something to you or is ringing a bell at the back of your mind, it's probably because it's the show that made a star of both Ethel Merman and Ginger Rogers. More than that, it was the show on which Ginger Rogers met Fred Astaire, although he wasn't in it, he was acting as a kind of top-up choreographer. And it was a show that introduced many Gershwin standards, probably the most famous being I Got Rhythm, which interestingly is in fact actually a 34-bar song. But that does make it unusual. In fact, I Got Rhythm is a very unusual song anyway, and Ira Gershwin had the greatest trouble finding a way of setting a lyric to it. And in the end found the only way satisfactorily to do it with such an unusual rhythm was to dispense with the usual pattern of rhyming. And as he himself observed, in the end he only added a few rhymes to make the song work. But we digress. Girl Crazy was written in 1930 by George and Ira Gershwin, who wrote the score, and had a book by John McGowan and Guy Bolton. And Guy Bolton is probably most famous as one of the people who wrote the books for a number of famous musicals: Primrose, Lady Be Good, and Anything Goes. And in today's conversation, all three of those shows will be referenced. But in 1992, Girl Crazy was adapted, and new songs were added to it, so it became a kind of jukebox musical for the Gershwin Brothers, and it became an enormous hit, both in America and in the United Kingdom. And over the years I've been doing Musical Talk, I've noticed that a number of British composers have quoted seeing Crazy for You when they were younger, when it came to London in the 1990s, 1993 to be precise, and identifying it as being influential in their falling in love with musical theatre. So it is a really important show. And here in the United Kingdom, we've only recently seen the closure of a revival of Crazy for You, which started in 2022 as part of the Chichester Festival. It was a brand new production, although still directed and choreographed by Susan Stroman, who directed it in its original production in 1992. And that show then came to London, opening in June 2023 and running to the last day of that year. I went to see it a number of times, and on one occasion I saw it with the very excellent Josh Clark. And it's the conversation I had with Josh about that 2023 London production that we'll be listening to in today's episode. And we'll be talking about Charlie Stemp and also Tom Eden and Carly Anderson, who played Bobby, Bella and Polly respectively, as well as analysing, as far as we're able to analyse a show which is really just pure entertainment, the book and the score of Crazy for You. So let's hear that conversation with the ever effervescent, and I don't remember a time when he ever wasn't, Josh Clark, as we discuss Crazy for You. Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. Josh, let me give you the lowdown. I'm crazy for you.
Oh, yeah, and you shouldn't respond to that with silence. It's ever so rude, isn't it? But it's lovely to see you as well, Thos. Yes,
Thank you, Josh.
yes. So what are we talking about today?
We're talking about Crazy for You. I've got a question for you. I do like to start with a question, if I may. The show is called Crazy for You. What is the title song?
Well, that is a good question, isn't it? That is a good question. Well, yes, how do you pronounce that?
You've not fallen into my little
Yeah.
trap. Well, would you care to elaborate?
Well, it is Crazy for You, if you were to look at it on the page, but spelt differently.
Spelt differently.
Yes, all right, that's where we're going.
It is. I think this is really interesting at one level, at a tiny, tiny little Trivial Pursuit kind of level. The show is called Crazy for You. It's a new show in the sense that it's based on Girl Crazy from 1930, I think. But it was invented in the 90s. Its title number is Crazy for You, but the title number is spelt with a K and has lots of little dashes in it. It's Let Me Give You the Lowdown. I'm crazy for you. Is how it's performed, although perhaps a little bit better. So this is a show which is named after a song that doesn't exist in its score. Or it does, but only as a homonym.
Goodness, this is technical stuff. Yes, you're quite right. But perhaps because when all of these Gershwin tracks were stitched together and they realised that narratively that one was going to come early on, it would be nice to have the name of the show sung almost immediately. You know, perhaps if Naughty Baby, the song, had been the first one, we might have been seeing a whole different show.
Go and see Naughty Baby. Right, but funny enough, you picked two songs from the show I want to talk about, and there'll be plenty more. But let's get the brass tacks down. Crazy for You, how would you describe this as a show? I've said the word concoction.
Yes.
I'm sure you'll think of other better words.
Well, concoction is good because I think I've just used the word stitched together, you know, or the phrase stitched together, and already given away the fact this is all Gershwin music.
It is all Gershwin.
Which is a lovely, lovely thing. So it is also an excuse to have a show with lots of Gershwin music in. It is led by the music, isn't it? And,
yes.
And you feel that at some points more than others. And a narrative is stitched quite well, to be fair, around it to make the songs work. So in one respect, that might sound like the modern phenomenon of the jukebox musical.
I'm glad you said that, because I wanted to touch on that. But, I hear...
Yes, but dare I suggest there's a little bit more to it than that. And I think there probably is, because, you know, you go to some jukebox musicals and, well, some recent ones are a little more, if we're honest, than a theatrical concert.
A medley almost.
A medley, that's a good way of putting it, yes. Whereas if you didn't know that these songs had a life of their own before Crazy for You, then you could quite justifiably think that, you know, the whole thing was written concurrently. So, yes, you asked me how I would describe it. Let's describe it as a celebration. Oh, lovely. A celebration of Gershwin's greatest hits, some of them. He was prolific, wasn't he? And
for a man who didn't live for very long.
Yes, indeed. So there's an awful lot that
and
can't make it in.
Strike rate as well, by which I mean that actually so a high proportion of what he wrote is classic standard material. There's not much throwaway. Yeah.
So, all right, let's finish that off. A celebration of Gershwin with an enjoyable, sometimes plausible narrative plotline.
I tell you what its closest relative is, I think, is Anything Goes.
Yes.
Because the Cole Porter evergreen, Everything Goes, and we've discussed this in depth, of course, over 3 episodes in 2022, I think. The thing about that is it's based on another musical called Anything Goes, and most people think it's the same show, but it isn't. Basically, that show was reworked in the 1980s to become the modern version. It owes a lot to that original version, but it is actually a very different thing with extra songs interpolated and lots of the characters reworked and rechanged. You know, it's highly connected to, but very different from its original source material. And the same is true for Crazy for You. Originally Girl Crazy from 1930 is the show that introduced I Got Rhythm, but it's got two bigger claims to fame. It's the show that introduced Ginger Rogers, and we'll hear more of her later, and Ethel Merman. Now, Ethel Merman got I Got Rhythm, and it's also the show that introduced Fred Astaire to Ginger Rogers. He wasn't in it, but he was brought in to help zip up the choreography with Ginger Rogers, so that is when they met. So it's an important show in that sense. The Gershwins are in their Broadway pomp by about 1930. They could do no wrong, pretty much. So this show isn't the same as Girl Crazy, but it borrows a lot from that show. And that show starts in Broadway and goes over to sort of the Wild West, or at least a sleepy western town, which is exactly the journey we get here. Now, the intricacies, shall we call it that, of the plot have been changed a bit. But it still owes a lot, and a number of the songs from Girl Crazy are in this. I think 6 have survived all the way through. I Got Rhythm being one of them. I'm Biding My Time. I love I'm Biding My Time. It's a great lyric by Ira Gershwin. Just the second line, I'm biding my time, because that's the kind of guy I'm. But first of all, it's a brilliant rhyme, but also it's for people who are too lazy not to conjoin their words. It's a contraction, isn't it? It's it's so kind of oofy. You can hear the tiredness in the tempo, in the way it's a song that really brings itself alive, ironically, by not bringing itself alive. But it is a modern concoction based on something good, and like Anything Goes, the new version of it, it's what we think of as an archetypal 1920s, 1930s Broadway comedy musical. And in that, I think it succeeds. I found it very funny.
I found it very funny. I was, to link to what you just said there, I was surprised that it was only originated in the 1990s.
Yes.
I thought it was far older than that.
Yeah, you mean this iteration?
This iteration, yes.
Absolutely. And what's interesting, isn't it? They brought back Susan Stroman.
Yes.
Who was the original director to do it this time. So the fact it's in the lifetime of the originating director. It tells you everything, I think. But let's just pick up one or two of the pieces. I said there were 2 songs I particularly wanted to talk about. Crazy for You is the first one. At the beginning of the show, we're backstage on the final night of the season of the
Follies, Ziegfeld Follies.
That's right. It's not the Ziegfeld Follies, it's the Zangler. He's Bella Zangler and not Florence Ziegfeld, but you can see who he is. I mean, he's another fake Follies man, but we also, Sondheim invented Weissman. They're always given these slightly exotic European names, because Flo Ziegfeld, Florence rather than Florence, but So we're on the last night of the current season of the Zangler Follies closing. And then Bobby Childs, who's going to be our hero, played by the wonderful Charlie Stemp, that we'll be talking about in just a minute, comes on to audition. He wants to be on the stage. He wants to be in the next season of the Follies. And he auditions, and he's terrible. In the sense he accidentally stamps on Zangler's foot, which is interestingly what Polly Sawyer does in 42nd Street.
Yes.
I assume that must be deliberate. I mean, it's just...
Yes, I think it definitely is. I mean, we're celebrating Gershwin, but it's also a celebration of theatre as well, isn't it? So it's one of those feel-good shows for theatre fans and people who know about theatre and have probably done a little bit of theatre, whatever level as well. Yeah, so there's that self-referential aspect to it, isn't there?
But the thing about Bobby Childs, and this is his fundamental contradiction, and you might think, well, hang on, he's only a comedy character, and so he is, but although he's the romantic lead too. He isn't very good when he auditions for Zangler, and he fluffs his dancing, and he's not that good. Charlie Stemp not dancing well, or rather dancing brilliantly in amateur steps, is the better way of describing it, is an interesting phenomenon anyway. But the song, I'm Crazy for You, absolutely sums that up, because it's terrible lyrically. It's got some lines in it, let me show you the lowdown, I'm crazy for you. When it comes to a showdown, I'm crazy for you. And this is the bit, though words may not inspire my lingo, still they're making my heart go bango bingo. This is not prime Ira Gershwin. This is Ira Gershwin sending up bad lyrics in a song, which is, it's not melodically sophisticated, and if it weren't for this show, I doubt anyone would know the song Crazy for You.
Yes.
I've never heard of it on any compilation album. I've never heard, I've spent a lot of time eating, living and breathing Gershwin music because I adore it. Gershwin's my go-to when I'm unhappy. He makes me happy instantly. I don't know how, but He's vital, and he brings a vitality and a spark to me, and he does it on stage. But let's not get into the appreciation of Gershwin quite yet. But I'm Crazy for You is not a good song. It's designed not to be a good song. It therefore is very successful as not being a good song. It's matched with a brilliant performer pretending not to be a brilliant performer, and it succeeds because he fumbles his audition, which basically ultimately sends him off on his journey out west, which changes his life. However, somewhere on that journey, he becomes a great dancer because actually it's very quickly established that he's a great dancer and a choreographer, and he could do all these things. So we have to assume that it's nerves.
Yes.
Because he obviously has got those skills. But it's sort of never mentioned. Weren't you rubbish in the audition? Never comes up. But he was rubbish. He had a rubbish song and he performs rubbishly, he said, turning it into an adverb. But he's instantly brilliant the moment he gets out of that confine.
Did we mention a plot device written around a whole load of songs to make it work?
Yes, that is a very fair point. But the song does exist.
Oh, no, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. But maybe that is something that, it doesn't matter too much. We just set up the plot, everything can get moving, and, he's good, really, so we'll go with it.
This isn't a tense psychodrama like we were just talking about with Sunset Boulevard in another episode. Yeah, you're right. It doesn't matter that he appears to have a bit of a change of personality or at least a skill set. So you're absolutely right. The other song I wanted to talk about is, and you mentioned it, Naughty Baby. Now, here's my question for you. You like Gershwin, I think, but I guess you're not fingertips on the history.
Yes, accurate, yeah.
So, this is a concoction musical. Could you identify what was the latest Gershwin song in it? What was the earliest Gershwin song in it? Or do they all sound to your ear of an era? And there's no wrong answer to this.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, there are different types of song in there.
Yeah.
But, you can write different styles in a particular era. I would put together things like, you mentioned, I think, Nice Work If You Can Get It. Yes.
Well, I haven't mentioned it, but it is.
You haven't mentioned it,
no,
all right.
But it's fab.
Yeah, exactly. And one that, most people would recognise more than some of the others. I would put that with, in a way, the real American folk song is a rag. I would put that with Slap That Bass. Perhaps even I Got Rhythm as the toe-tapping, jaunty, get up and dance kind of song. Yeah. Whereas, I don't know, Someone to Watch Over Me, Things Are Looking Up could well be contemporary with those ones I've said, but they are stylistically different. I think you're going to have to tell me.
I am, if I may. It's interesting you should say that, because you were talking about the real American folk song is a rag being in your head similar as toe tapping a number to Nice Work If You Can Get It. Nice Work If You Can Get It is right at the end of Gershwin's life. It's from his last film, Damsel in Distress. I think he was dead when it premiered.
Right.
And it was written at the same time and filmed more or less back to back with Shall We Dance, a Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers film. A Damsel in Distress is just a Fred Astaire film. And so Slap That Bass comes from that. But the real American folk song is a rag. The clue's in the title. The very reference to a rag probably sets that back 15 years early.
Yes.
But I agree with you. It is a very upbeat number, as you'd expect from a rag, honestly. But it's more of a showcase number for the hillbillies, shall we call them, who live in the town in the West. But yes, you're right. They're oomph numbers, if you like, and you've identified Someone to Watch Over Me as being that more emotional side of it. These songs are of their era. They are broad, but it's very easy to bundle them together. But you were talking about contemporaneous with each other or not. Naughty Baby is one of the earlier songs here. And in fact, it comes from a show called Primrose, which regular listeners of Musical Talk will know I drop into the conversation periodically, because it's the British Gershwin musical. Because as he was an up-and-coming name in the early 20s, an enterprising British producer dragged him and his brother over to do a show in London, which became Primrose, which is it's the show before Lady Be Good, which, if you like, I think is the one that really sets the Gershwin style and feel in stone. So Primrose is a halfway house between... You can see the beginnings of that, but actually it's also been tailored for a British audience, and he was a great Gilbert and Sullivan fan. So it's not Gilbert and Sullivan-esque, or rather it's not a Gilbert and Sullivan pastiche, but it has a lot of the tropes of Gilbert and Sullivan. So I think you can listen to Primrose and only say, there's only 3 or 4 songs which sound like core Gershwin, but one of them is Naughty Baby. But it makes it one of the earliest. It's about 1923, along with A Real American Folk Song is a Rag. There's also I'll Build a Stairway to Happiness, which is used instrumentally several times throughout the piece. No lyrics. It's interesting. They don't sing the lyrics for it. It's most famous now for appearing in the film American in Paris with Gene Kelly.
Yes, and of course American in Paris is also where we have I Got Rhythm, and I thought that in my ignorance when I saw that years and years ago, that was perhaps written for that show. Maybe it was, probably not.
No,
just a standard, right? But yeah, you've got Gene Kelly singing that with a whole crowd of French children in that one.
That's right, and there's a chap who's got a European accent called George Gershwin, who, fun enough, is the chap who sings "I'll build a stairway to paradise." He sings like he was a big hit on the British stage. I mean, funny enough, he sang lots of songs written by Vivian Ellis, who was a great British composer and contemporary of Noel Coward and Ivan Novello. But we get too in depth. But the point is, you've got nice work if you can get it right from the very last gasp, if you like, of Gershwin, all the way backwards to Naughty Baby, which is sort of almost what you would call pre-Gershwin, early Gershwin, before Lady Be Good. So, and you've got stuff that's written for films, and you've got stuff that's written for Broadway. But, and this, because I know it, I can't work out whether Gershwin now all sounds not the same, but is there such is there a Gershwin sound that you can recognise?
Gosh, yeah, I've talked on Musical Talk about signatures recently, haven't we? And the identifying mark of the composer. I think there almost is.
I think there is.
There is. Unfortunately, again for this, 2 shows that we're talking about recently that have done full service to a proper orchestra.
Oh yes.
Yeah, it was the first thing I checked in the programme when I went to this one, because you want to see a Gershwin done with more than a 5-piece and a synth, don't you? So,
yes.
and you got a lot here. That said, looking back at it now, I was thinking that the Gershwin signature, maybe in some of the more, what I think you were saying with some of the earlier ones, maybe some more of the lyrical songs, it's certain use of the strings and a nice lush feeling to that. Now that would be one aspect. We've got Slap That Bass in here, and so also with
that's much more syncopated, of course.
Much more syncopated, yeah. So for the toe tappers, I mean that's another side to the Gershwin signature. Really strong beat then, syncopation, and
it's what I call vitality. Actually, I think a few minutes ago,
okay.
Because I think that's almost the word. Really, it also sounds 2030s.
Yeah, so I think either of those you'd have a pretty good estimation of a song from the period being Gershwin.
I think you can pick out a Gershwin. Then again, you see, once again, I don't know, because I've immersed so thoroughly in Gershwin. I think you can pick out a Gershwin from about 50 paces. Certainly what I would call classic Gershwin from 24 to, let's say, 37, 38 when he dies. And his shows are still coming out for a little bit longer. But it is interesting to me to find out how that sounds to other people. We've spoken a little bit about the score. If you like Gershwin, this score is wonderful. There's a couple of other points just to make. There's a couple of speech marks lost Gershwin songs in this score. I think there's one called Tonight's the Night. It's very short, and it comes from that era, actually, in the 20s and 30s, and you see it in Anything Goes as well. There are the songs everyone knows from Cole Porter, and then there are going to be the filler songs, which is, oh look, it's all the people on the liner singing a song saying, and now, look who's coming.
Yes.
And in Lady Be Good, there's a song called Linger in the Lobby, where the cast open in Act 2, where they're all standing in the foyer of a hotel. It's that kind of number. So Tonight's the Night is that kind of number. I believe it was written for a show and then never used, so this was, oddly enough, when Crazy for You first opened in the 90s, 94 or whatever, it was a premiere. And then there's the lost Gershwin song, which is wonderful. And there are now a couple of other recordings by it. Michael Feinstein's done one of What Causes That. And it's also a great comic number, because that's the one where our hero Bobby is dressed as Bella Zangler, and they both ended up in the same saloon, both drunk, so they can't quite believe what they're seeing. And they're doing that perfect matched
It was
movement,
brilliant, this.
wasn't it?
Yeah,
great?
yeah.
So there are these are real rarities. I must tell you, I never knew the song What Causes That until I bought the London cast recording of Crazy for You from the 90s. And that was a surprise to me. I thought by then I knew, I was an early adopter of Gershwin. I also a terribly late one. I'm talking about early for me as a teenager. He'd been dead 50 years, but I can't hold that against him. It's terribly tantalising, however, by the way. I should say that when I was first getting into Gershwin, if he had lived a full life, his obituary would have come out about the time I was really getting into him. Same thing with Fred Astaire. Fred Astaire died when I was 17. Anyway, there, that's by the by. I am enthusiastic about Gershwin. But we've spoken about the songs. I've bored you, Rigid. I'm so sorry. But there is star quality in Crazy for You, and I think we have to mention him first of all, above all the other cast members. This is Charlie Stemp. Have you seen him before? What do you think?
No, I hadn't seen him before, but had, well, tried to indicate far too much effort on my part, because I could have gone to see Mary Poppins. It's one of those where, you know, you go down the escalator and you see all the adverts, and you
Must
think,
see that,
I've got to go
yes.
and see Charlie Stemp in Mary Poppins before he closes, and I never see it. Anyway, I missed it. Also, didn't see, now, what did he play in? Was it Half a Sixpence, or did they change the name?
It's subsequently been renamed.
Yes.
On the stage, it was Half a Sixpence.
Yes.
By David Henniker, revised by Stiles and Drew.
You said I had a half memory, didn't I?
That's
it
right.
was
It's now called Kips.
Kips.
Which is the name of the book from which it originates.
Yes. Now, I
think it's called Kips, the Half a Sixpence musical.
Yes.
The way they square that circle.
And I think that was on some kind of TV programme, perhaps last Christmas or the one before.
Sky Arts, I think, broadcast.
Right.
Yes.
And I
You're
think
absolutely right.
I might have had one eye open, one eye closed with it, not really being aware of what was going on at Christmas. So
Half an eye.
yes, sorry, unintentional. Anyway, very aware of his work.
Yeah, but hadn't
and
seen him per se.
Hadn't seen him, but that was actually the main reason behind first going to see this production.
I agree with you. Funny enough, I've tried much harder than you to see him and missed him every time. I saw Half Sixpence on stage, and it was the night he was off and we had the understudy. Now, the understudy was brilliant, but I would have liked to have seen Charlie Stemp, and I missed him and all the other things. And he's done lots of things, and I missed him every time. So seeing him in Crazy for You was something I wanted to see, because he is... I mean, he's fully established now, but he is a name in British musical theatre, and he's one of those rare names. We don't have many single name male dancers in British musical theatre. It's quite rare, and we haven't had one for a long time. You know, there were lots of versatile performers who could do everything a few years ago, by which I mean the 60s. But, you know, Bruce Forsyth.
Yes.
You know, even I've seen footage just recently of Norman Wisdom, who's thought of as a sort of a clown, really. Playing the clarinet whilst tap dancing. You just, you don't see that.
Well,
anymore.
that's it. I mean, I remember seeing Wayne Sleep playing the MC in Cabaret.
Oh, yes.
Like, oh, he sings as well.
Yeah, because people get easily labelled.
Yes.
So, for me, Charlie Stemp was somebody I wanted to see because he's this shining star in the British theatrical firmament. But, here's the interesting thing for me. I've always wondered what range he had. Because in Half a Sixpence, he is the romantic hero, and he is the light, therefore, romantic lead. And he plays that beautifully because he's a handsome man and he can do all the things he needs to do, principally dance. But it's not a comic role. It's certainly not an overtly comic role. There's light comedy in it. But, Half a Sixpence isn't a comedy. Not really. And certainly wasn't on the stage version in that adaptation. They tried to get the emotion into it, so it was possibly less funnier than it was with Tommy Steele. In the 50s and 60s. He plays Bert, the Dick Van Dyke character in Wiry Poppins, as the blessed Dick Van Dyke would say in Mary Poppins, but. Once again, Bert is actually fundamentally a avuncular character. There's a huge twinkle in him. Twinkle is perfectly reasonable, but he's not a funny character.
No.
And he's been in this and that and the other. And what I've not clocked is Charlie Stemp able to do comedy? And when I saw he was doing Crazy for You, the thing, we started on this. What is Crazy for You? It's a comedy concoction. It's the nearest we're going to get to seeing Girl Crazy. So it is trying to be a 1930s light-hearted, frothy comedy with not that much depth, as you've identified in the plot. Therefore, I was wondering how he was going to do it. I must say, it was a delight to discover that he's absolutely got comedy chops. So that was the real surprise to me. That was the next revelation. He can dance. I knew that before I saw him, and yes, he could. And goodness me, he can do it brilliantly.
Superb.
He can sing, actually. He's got a very tuneful voice, and he must be relatively good at singing, because he turned up in Stephen Sondheim's Old Friends, the sort of the tribute to Stephen Sondheim. And you don't get just chucked into a Sondheim, even a concert of that nature. You've got to be able to do the work, because work is what you do with a Sondheim. So he can sing. But the fact he could do comedy, and comedy brilliantly, he spends about half the show dressed as Bela Zangler, the Hungarian director of the Follies, pretending to be him in the Wild West. to put on a show in order to sort of win the fair hand of Polly. Of course, that's the plot. And actually, fun enough, he looks so good with the white streak in his hair. It's like, you know, that Hungarian look, if you like, and the little beard. I actually found it very strange when he divests himself of those props later on. And you think, oh, hang on, yes, he did look like that. He was clean-shaven. I'm so used to him looking like the Bella Zangler character. But actually, we mentioned the physical comedy. You know, the physical comedy is where they're doing the mirror act, essentially. And that's got to be done to perfection to make it work, and it was. They were both good in that. The actor who plays Bella Zangler is equally good.
Yes, Tom Eden.
Yeah, very impressed by him. And then there's other kinds of comedy as well, which is being able to get a laugh out of a punchline.
Yes.
And he could do that too. There's a lovely line where he's dressed as Bella and he's dancing with Polly, but she thinks he's Bella and she's falling in love with Bella as she thinks it. And she says, "You dance even better than Bobby." And he's, "I really don't." I can't do it as well as he did, but he got the laugh. And I thought to myself, oh, this is so good. He's going to therefore have a lifelong career. You know, it's like Gary Wilmot.
Yes.
Gary Wilmot was the biggest name in British musical theatre 20 years ago. He's still a great name now. He was in the televised version of Anything Goes, but you saw at the Barbican.
Yeah.
He's a bit older now. He's not going to get the romantic leads, but my goodness, he still gets the comedy.
He's about to open something back home in Plymouth.
Oh, is he? Oh, jolly
He is
good.
next year. That wasn't me tantalising in anticipation of telling you because I've forgotten what it is. But it makes the point, doesn't it? Still
you
around,
can still have a career,
longevity.
And he's brilliant. I mean, Gary Wilmot. If you have a career like Gary Wilmot, you've done very well. And if Charlie Stemp can do the comedy, even when he's too old to dance too much,
well,
he'll be able to do it.
My first encounter with Gary Wilmot, he won't know this, was in Panto. And he was a regular one in the Theatre Royal pantomime back in Plymouth. You know, year after year he'd get that, and I think he has a bit of an affection for theatre.
The dame, or
no.
the lead, or the romantic hero?
The kind of the buttons,
Yes, of course.
Yes. Anyway, Charlie Stemp did 3 years in the big panto at the Palladium.
Yes, he did. That's right. I mean, obviously he was named by them, but you're right.
Yes.
That's comedy too, and I didn't see those. And I should have.
Now knowing that, or remembering that at least, you do see elements of that physical comedy, don't you?
He can do it
in this. Yeah.
I mean, as a physical man, he's amazing. Obviously, the dance is a particular thing, and there's almost no point in saying he's a great dancer because he's a great dancer, but he's the real deal because he can do the rest of it.
You say there's no point in saying it. Well, I'm going to say it anyway.
Okay.
Because
is he a great dancer?
It was a great dancer. It's okay. I was about to say it's the first of the kind of big Hollywood film style musicals. Check myself there. Style musicals that I've seen on stage. Now I have seen Singing in the Rain on stage.
So 42nd Street.
And yes, all right. I'm all right. Let me put it this way, because I'm imagining in my head now all the films with people like Fred Astaire that you've mentioned, Gene Kelly, Frank Sinatra, etc. Oh, I've seen Guys and Dolls, but that's a different thing. But it's the first time that I think I've seen something which was as polished and accomplished as those filmed, amazing dance sequences.
Yes.
When I've seen Singing in the Rain on stage, now of course you cannot expect it to be Gene Kelly, because obviously it's not. But I remember it being, oh, this is brilliant. Not quite as good as the film. Whereas Crazy for You, I was just watching him move and thinking, this could very easily be one of those films.
Do you know, it's funny you should say that, because I agree with you completely. Oddly, I mean, it's interesting, we've mentioned Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire, of course we have. And this is a derivation of a Ginger Rogers piece with some Fred Astaire choreography originally, Girl Crazy. But it feels so much like one of the RKO Fred and Ginger films from the 1930s. Absolutely. And I can see Fred in that role as Bobby Childs. And I can absolutely see Ginger in the role of Polly. In fact, she made a great, one of her big things in those sequence of films is the slightly reluctant lover with great comedy timing. Ginger Rogers is a brilliant comedian. So much taken for granted in that sense, but it's all there, and of course she can dance as well. It's and actually the person who played Polly,
Carly Anderson,
thank you, was fabulous as well. I mean, and she's also quite a strong female character, which presumably is where the rewriting has come in. I guess to make it a bit more suitable for the modern temperament, but it still could work immediately. So I agree with you. There are moments where one is transported, or at least I was. Now, before we started recording, you and I were talking about the Gillian Lynn Theatre as a building, formerly the New London, and it is a modernist theatre. And so what you get is a brilliant auditorium with every seat relatively comfortable and with a good view, more or less. So that sense, really brilliantly designed. And an absolutely appalling foyer area, which is all staircases and tiny little strips of bars. It doesn't feel like there's a place to meet. There's no central concourse, if you like. And you might argue, well, that's a good use of space. You want it all in the auditorium. Of course you do. But actually, it feels like a warren on the outside. It's not a very comforting theatre, if that makes sense.
No, it's not.
And it's not the modernism. It's the design of the entrance area, I think.
Yes. Now, obviously, I didn't see the way that people with mobility issues were getting to their seat, but the way that I went was not accessible.
No, not at all. Staircase, bar turning, staircase, landing, staircase.
Yeah. But you're right. You do forgive it. The seats there were fantastic.
They were
comfortable. I mean, compared with your average West End theatre.
But the thing is, it's a modernist theatre.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that. And I like modernism in its place, brutalism. But the show is very much saying, this is 1930. And indeed, it's part of the set design. You've got two silver life-size statues of women holding lamps like balls, for an expression, on either side of a stage in a kind of Art Deco thing. Now, it's a fake edition. But when the lights went down and we got the overture for Crazy for You, I, who know my Gershwin, at least, I just sat there and thought, this somehow has been I've been transported and the whole building has been transmogrified like a pantomime, and we were talking about those as well, the transformation scene from a modernist auditorium to a 1920s Savoy theatre style building with the music of Gershwin creeping out from it's not actually a pit, but from the orchestra. They were elevated, I think. And I felt I was possibly in a Broadway theatre in 1930. It was the most amazing sensation. It's that odd sense of the brilliant late Benny Green, who was a great radio presenter who I've learnt a great deal from over the years. He's one of my 4 founding fathers, and I'm always happy to pay tribute to them. Benny Green, Russell Davies, David Jacobs and Desmond Carrington. Benny Green wrote a book about the great composers of the 1930s, and in it, and I think he is the best person to I think he's encapsulated what Gershwin is and was more than anyone else. But he says that Gershwin knew somehow that he was writing for his era, and he was writing as the voice of his era, and I think there was no one more 20s and 30s than Gershwin. I love Cole Porter, I love Rodgers and Hart, I love Jerome Kern, I love Irving Berlin, Vincent Youmans, all these people, but the one that sounds and can take me to and is so archetypally to the point almost of stereotype is Gershwin. Gershwin makes me think it's 1928. And in that auditorium in 2023, in a building that's absolutely not from 1928, I felt I was in a auditorium from 1928. It was a wonderful experience.
It's interesting how it can just be the music that does that as well, isn't it? And
yes, it's got to be more. It
was nice that this, relatively speaking, modern musical, certainly in relation to Gershwin's music itself, had the old-fashioned overture, so it gives you a sense to fix yourself in the time. My favourite things I've always said on Musical Talk, the entr'acte as well.
Open Act 2, why don't you?
Yeah, I've bemoaned the absence of the entr'actes, that music to get you back in and anticipate the music and hark back to what's already come up. And a number of reprises too. So the music is at the front and centre and gets a good airing as well as just being stitched together, like we said earlier. So,
yes.
It is celebrated.
It is you said celebration at the beginning of this conversation, and I think you're absolutely right. That's a very pithy word, but it really brings it alive. It's like a musical set of fireworks almost, I think, the show.
It seems to be written by people who care about Gershwin's music.
Yeah.
And the thing is a tribute to it and to him.
What would be your take home from it? Because I'm going to make an observation about it. When I go into a show, I always want to enjoy the show for what it is, but I've always got at least a little bit of the back of my brain in a subroutine going, must make notes for Musical Talk. I'm sort of analysing it as I go. This is one of those shows where that bit was turned off. And not because I wanted to turn it off. At the time of we're speaking, I've seen it twice. And it's somehow that in that transformation scene that we've been talking about, my brain has rebooted itself to factory settings, which is I'm sitting here watching a great show. I'm now going to let the show come all over me in waves of delight. But not unfortunately, my analytical faculties are all retrospective because I had to turn it on again after the show. I somehow can't. The show is so tantalisingly delicious to me. Funny enough, there's a Gershwin song called "Delicious," but it's not in this.
Right.
There's it's so tantalisingly delicious as a show that it just sort of injects pure joy into my veins, and I'm too busy enjoying it as a sensory experience than an intellectual one.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head actually with that. As someone who kind of knows the music, certainly recognises and knows some of the songs well, others not really, I definitely found myself waiting for the next one that I knew. There was an element of that. I've, inadvertently rubbished the plot on this. I don't mean to actually.
Rubbished. I mean, identified it as not being the strongest element of the vehicle.
No, but weirdly, I remember it very, very well and thoroughly enjoyed it. And the comic characters, fantastic. The scenes in the Midwest. Can't remember exactly where. Oh, it's Nevada, actually, isn't it? It's right the way over. Yeah, it's right the way over.
Rock.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah. If it's not the Flintstones.
Yeah, and in fact, the joke was that maybe you should build a casino here, wasn't it?
Oh, and who's built one in the middle of the desert? Yes.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So we're way over towards the west. Anyway, those scenes there are particularly actually vibrant. The whole colour palette changes, doesn't it? It felt to me pretty Seven Brothers at that point.
Yes.
and stylistically as well.
Well, it's actually Seven Brothers for One Bride, because they also make a huge virtue of that. There seems to be only one woman in the entire town.
Yes, yeah. But in terms of takeaways, I think probably you are trying to capture the spirit of it more than standout moments.
Yeah, I like the idea that actually you're right. It's in terms of plot, it's sort of it is a light smorgasbord of opportunities for fun. But you're right, it's very memorable. I can also remember the beats. Just want to talk to you as a fellow British subject. Well, because there are two British characters in it.
Yes.
Our international explorers
Yes.
who turn up in basically safari jackets and sort of long, short trousers, shall we say,
Yes.
canvas bags, to live the stereotypical dream and be the American view of what Brits are, particularly from the 1930s. And we see them all, they're not offensive, these characters.
No.
Of course not. They're very, very silly. They were pretty standard at the time. And indeed, all those Fred and Ginger films have a kind of, although they're pretty much all, they're not all American actors, but they've all lived in America for a very long time, including the British ones. And some of the American ones feel British, like Edward Everett Horton, who isn't British but who could land in any British film and occasionally did. Funny enough, he works with Jack Buchanan in a thriller, oddly. You think you'd get musical out of the two of them, but there we are. But they often have a British sensibility and sometimes have British characters. And indeed, in Damsel in Distress, which is the last Gershwin musical film that he made before he died, which is where A Foggy Day in London Town comes from. It's set in Britain. It's got Bela Lugosi in it as well, and Stately Holmes and Gracie Allen. But what did you make of them? Because obviously they're such a they don't reflect any British person I've ever met or even imagined could have existed in the 30s in real terms. It feels to me like one of those concoctions that can only exist in fiction. Yes,
you're right. I'm going to go back to what you said earlier. If they turned up on the ship and anything goes, you'd think, we've been waiting for them.
What ho, chaps?
Yeah.
Yes.
Gosh, to try to describe their function in any way other than just to add another layer of madness.
Comedy flavouring,
would be, yes, I think pushing the desperation to analyse just a step too far. I mean, they're brilliant, but it's slapstick.
Yeah.
And jokes, isn't it?
And even the song, they sing Stiff Upper Lip.
Oh, yes.
Which is a song from A Damsel in Distress, which is a lovely song, and I love the original. And funnily enough, he's in the original film, he's used more interestingly. They sing the song, but it's then used as the background in a fairground. There are variants on the tune, ostensibly in a fairground. So it becomes a variation on a theme, oddly, which seems odd for a piece of musical theatre, although Gershwin did do variations on I Got Ribbon, funnily enough.
I suppose the point when they're in Nevada is that it comes away from being, when they're in New York, comes away from being the kind of 42nd Street feel, like you mentioned earlier, the romantic lead, to almost pure farce. Doesn't it?
It is pure farce.
Yes, and the more characters you've got packing the stage and packing a farce makes everything more farcical because there's exactly so there is, I suppose, that kind of functional thing to them as well. Every room of this strange little hotel is filled. We, again, divisive we are really looking at it, their function is to really emphasise how isolated everyone else is, because we get two people dressed as explorers turning up.
That is true,
just as a signifier,
you are the back of nowhere.
There's that.
The thing I found was interesting, and it's that song which I know from the film.
Yes.
It's a great song. I love it. I whistle it to myself when I'm washing up quite a lot. It's two Americans, George and Ira Gershwin, writing about stereotypical Brits as seen through the 1930s lens of Hollywood. So far, so good. I'm in. But these two are British characters. Of course, they're given the speech marks, the British song from the canon of Gershwin. Problem is, it doesn't fit in this show. So it's not plot relevant. At one level it is. They're trying to get people to buck up their ideas, so they sing "Stiff Upper Lip." It's what we say back in Britain. But actually, the whole song is all about silly choreography, because you've got the townsfolk in Dead Rock, or whatever it's called, having a meeting about whether or not they're going to put on the show and save the future of the theatre that seems to be there. That's the plot, in case you're interested. In fact, and these two come in and say, well, we're back from we come. We say stiff upper lip and get on with it, kind of thing. And then the whole dance is them standing at the front, sort of doing flicking dust off their shoulders. It's kind of, knock this matchbox off my shoulder kind of challenge. I don't know if you've seen that in films. It doesn't happen anymore. But full of what I would call little detail songs for comic effect. Has no worth. It's not important. But that's not the point, is it? And I think that takes us back to what is the point of this show? Is to enjoy yourself.
Yes.
It is not to write your analysis.
And that's sometimes absolutely fine and quite nice to recognise. And we've put some shows that we've spoken about this year in the context of post-COVID, and we've mentioned that it's closing a little bit earlier than was intended, and maybe a surprising aspect of that is the fact that this is just immersion in joy for a few hours.
Escapism,
and I'm pretty sure when we did that deep dive into Anything Goes, we said that was perhaps why that had been the one of the first big shows that came back after the pandemic, for that quality of just not having to get deep into a terrible dark plot, because people don't want it. It's the in the best possible way, the froth and the glitz and the glamour and the silliness.
That's a brilliant point. And actually, I think it says pretty much everything we need to say. That is the fitting epilogue, if you like, to this conversation. So thank you very much for talking Crazy for You with me. Talking with you is always fabulous work. In fact, it is nice work, and I'm glad we've got it.
Yes, such a shame, because I was going to finish with that. But
what would you have said?
Well, no, it's all right. I suppose tonight's the night for you to have the best lines.
Hey! Thank you, Josh.
Pleasure as always.
Musical talk. And there we are. That was the wonderful Josh Clark talking to me about the 2023 West End version of George and Ira Gershwin's Crazy for You, based on the 1930 musical Girl Crazy. And if you're interested in getting a sense of what it was like, you can find a number of clips on YouTube and other video streaming services, but I do wish there had been a cast recording. I'd have bought that like a shot. There may be private recordings, but they're not available. Or if they are available, they're available to others, but not for me. Oh, a hilarious Gershwin pun to finish the episode. And finish the episode it has, because we've probably said everything we need to say. And of course, I know there are many people who believe that's true of me in almost all circumstances, even at the beginning of an episode. Anyway, let's leave it there. And we'll do that by me saying the famous word, everyone knows it, that finishes this episode and indeed many a conversation and encounter. Goodbye. This episode of Musical Talk, presented by Josh Clark and Thos Ribbits, and edited by Thos Ribbits. Copyright Musical Talk 2025. To find out more about the world of musical talk and listen to past episodes, go along to our website www.musicaltalk.co.uk or subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your favourite podcasts. And follow us on all the usual social media networks. Well, they aren't the Ziegler.
No,
isn't it called Ziegler?
Ziegler. I think you're right. Zangler.
Let's say that again. Yeah.
Of course, I Got Rhythm is, the centrepiece of American Paris as well. Well, not quite centrepiece because there is the actual dream sequencey centrepiece, but
it is one of the great pieces. What did I say about? Sorry, which film did I say? I'll Build a Stairway.
American Paris.
Oh, good. I've got it right. Good.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Sorry, that's my fault for interrupting.